And we're live. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody around the world. Thank you for joining us today for the 2003-2024 discussion of Haas's essay questions, Berkeley Haas's essay questions, in particular, of course, the full-time 2-year flagship MBA program's essay questions. My name is Greg Guglielmo. I'm the founder of Avanti Prep. We are an MBA admissions consulting firm that works with applicants all around the world, primarily on MBA programs and MBA applications, but also on MBA adjacent or other graduate programs from time to time. I am joined today, I have the privilege of having on this call today Morgan Bernstein, who is the former head of admissions at Berkeley Haas, the executive head of admissions. She worked at Haas for 12 years. 9 of which were spent in admissions, and 4 of those 9 were spent running the whole team. She was actually led the admissions group when they designed certain of the essay questions that are still in today's application and still there today. So thank you, Morgan. Pleased to have you here. And Morgan, I should say, is now working with Avanti Prep in a variety of capacities. So Morgan is available, certainly to be an extra resource on calls like this. And we have, I think, what I hope is a really unique and for you all advantageous duality of perspective here, both from admissions consulting side, as well as from the other side of the veil, admissions office. Morgan we should clarify, no longer works in the Haas admissions office, but it was only just a couple of years ago. We'll go through her background a little bit further. Let's pull that presentation up on the screen there. Morgan does work too with applicants. People, if you're out there and you're applying to Haas or any other school, Morgan is available for direct interaction, direct advice, direct reviews, direct work. We'll go into some of the details as well of all that. So Haas's essay questions. Well, where does this all fit in? Let's just start a couple little, a little bit of stage setting here. You all, if you're thinking about applying in round 1, are probably now in the home stretch of applications. Some of those are coming just 2 weeks from today. Haas is another week or so after that. What you see up on the screen is almost like a flow chart that runs top to bottom of the overall MBA admissions process, starting from when or before you're even thinking about applying, pre-application advisory, profile building, some of the strategic elements. Picking your schools, strategizing about your story, thinking about your goals. Those middle pieces, those middle bars are what we sometimes think about as the 4 pillars of application execution: school research and engagement, essays, resume, recommendations, and then some of what comes after you hit submit down there at the bottom of the page. So just to acclimate and orient, what we're talking about today, obviously, is essays. It's that big pillar. We've highlighted it in yellow there. Today, of course, is focused specifically on Haas essays. I often joke to Morgan, this and other folks I speak with, this is not to scale. I mean, essays, we could kind of stretch that out. You've got different essays for different schools. Haas this year has 4 required essays. 3 are actually written essays. 1's a video. Resume, got to get it right once and you're good for pretty much every school. Essays, of course, are going to vary by school. And part of our job is to help you tackle the nuances, wrestle the nuances. This does double, by the way, as a little bit of a menu of what we work on with applicants. Any part or any area of the application process, from the beginning at the top, all the way to the conclusion at the bottom, all the way through interview prep, scholarship negotiations, waitlist support. Even a lot of our clients reach back out to us once they're enrolled, and we help them with their recruiting resumes, their recruiting cover letters, in some cases even recruiting interview prep. So we're available for all of that. This is another, way to think about some of the services, another kind of visual of this. So if any of this, strikes a chord, whether it is, I think, perhaps obviously for Haas, because we have the very unique expertise of Morgan, but of course, all the other schools we work on. I mean, we've had applicants admitted to over 50 schools around the world, 50 different programs, 50 around the world. We certainly welcome you reaching out and would welcome the chance to help you on Haas or anything else. I've mentioned Morgan a few times here. I'll pass it to her in a moment to dive into some of these essay questions, but to just to reiterate her background, 12 4-ish years working with Haas, more recently as director of strategic initiatives for the dean. But 4 years before that was the executive director, and another 5 years prior to being promoted to the head of admissions, was an associate director of admissions. So 9 years total in admissions. And a little bit of a distinction here. We see this word director get thrown around in the application land in the MBA universe. Pretty much anybody who works on an admissions team holds some version of the title director. You could be, your first job out of college, and you might be you join an admissions team. You're an assistant director, and then an associate director, and a director. So you see that word director out there a lot, and I think it's important to emphasize, what that, or clarify what that could mean. Somebody could be on an admissions team for 6 months and it's their first job out of college and they are a director of admissions. What we want to reinforce here, and I guess in highlighting the value of having Morgan on a call like this and on our team, is that she was the executive director. She was the head of admissions, in charge of the whole thing, in charge of the entire process related to connecting with and evaluating thousands and thousands of applicants over this number of years. So her expertise is relevant to today's call, but also naturally to just the whole admissions universe and the whole act and art of storytelling and applying. She is now, like I said, available to help you through Avanti Prep in a variety of capacities. You could read about them there on the page, or also visit our website. These can be kind of tactical, couple hours, enhance your story, read through and opine on, and give you actionable hands-on improvement steps for your Haas essays or any other applications. Interview prep, of course, again, not only for Haas, but for any other school. And you can also sign up to work with Morgan on a little bit more of a protracted hourly services engagement, or even potentially combine work with Morgan with work with me or one of our senior consultants. So a lot of different options. We're happy to answer questions about that later on. Without further ado, Haas's essay questions in 2023-24. Again, these are the full-time flagship 2-year MBA program essay questions, which I think is, the audience that we have here today. Part-time MBA, executive MBA, the questions are typically going to vary a little bit, though sometimes there's overlap. 4 required questions, a little bit of variance. I don't know how curious folks are to know how these have changed year over year. You could see some of the description there on the page of how they've evolved. But the first big question, kind of the classic Haas question, which Morgan wrote and designed when she was head of admissions and has now been in the Haas app for several years. What makes you feel alive when you're doing it, and why? There is this year a new 300-word essay. How will an MBA help you achieve your short-term and long-term career goals? That is part of a very classic and common MBA application essay question. We'll talk about what that means, part, and what parts you should focus on. Now there's a video question this year, up to 2 minutes, about the defining principles. Briefly introduce yourself to the admissions committee, explain which leadership principle resonates most with you, and tell us how you've exemplified this principle in your personal and professional life. And finally, an essay question that Haas has had. It actually grew this year to 300 words. Can you please describe any experience or exposure you have in the area of diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and belonging, whether through community organizations, personal, or in the workplace? 4 required essays. We're going to get through those. Morgan, when we think about these essay questions, we're going to walk through them one by one, but I think the first thing to think about is how might applicants think of these in aggregate, or how they strategize among and between and across the totality of them?
Yeah, no, great question. And first, I just want to say thank you for the very kind and thoughtful introduction. Greg and I have a long history of working together, of being colleagues together, when Greg was a student at Berkeley Haas, actually, and served as a Haas student ambassador. And I was at that point an associate director. So that was our first opportunity to work together on admissions related things. And here we are now, several years later, at Avanti Prep. So thank you for that introduction. In terms of the essays, and I should share up front that what I'll share is my perspective based on my experience as an admissions committee member and as the executive director of admissions. And what I share does not necessarily represent the Haas Adcom or executive director today, but is of course based on my 9 years of experience in admissions. So, you know, the essays is really the one component of the application where the students can truly the applicants can truly differentiate themselves. If you think about it, the rest of the application, your test scores, your GPA, your experience, that is very consistent across the board. And a lot of those things have already been predetermined. They cannot be changed at this point. The essays is really your opportunity to shape how you show up and to craft your narrative for the admissions committee. The other thing I want to share before we get into the individual essays is that while there are 4 different required essays here, and you may be inclined to tackle them individually, what I want to reiterate is that combined, these are different pieces of a puzzle that should all fit together to tell your story. So before you even jump into individual essay questions for Haas or for other programs for that matter, I think it's really important to take a step back and outline what is it that I want the admissions committee to know about me? What experiences, what skills, what attributes and characteristics, and have a clear map of what those, call it, 3 to 5, 5 to 7 things are, and then figure out how you can use the essays to bring those to life. But they should each fit together as a piece of the puzzle with some but minimal overlap.
Yeah, and I'll just add, from an applicant process perspective, whether we are working with you or not, working with an applicant or not, it's just something you can think about and should think about as you go through your process. Just to skip back real quick, one thing Morgan just alluded to, I would sort of bucket it, certainly here, story development, to an extent goal development, because you've got to think about your professional goals and why you want an MBA. When we start working with applicants, we send you like a 5 or 6 page questionnaire. It's got 25 questions in it. We are the metaphor that if we've ever done a free consultation together, you all have probably heard me use is ripping all the wires out of the wall of your life to understand what's in there, to take inventory of what's in there personally, professionally, leadership, key moments, transformational moments, failures. I froze there for a second. Okay. In order to identify what those key stories and anecdotes are, and then figure out that step sits above essay brainstorming. Then you got to figure out where and how to deploy or drop those stories or present those stories between the different component parts of the application. Haas has 2 optional essays as well. I don't think we, in the interest of time, want to spend a ton on this. Maybe at the end, if there are some questions about it, many schools will have variations of these optional essays as well, but we'll focus here. Haas has 4 to get through. So we'll try to spend, 8 to 10 minutes or something on each of these. What makes you feel alive when you are doing it, and why? Again, what has become kind of a classic Haas essay. I will pass it back over to Morgan to, share what is Haas looking for in this, in her mind, and maybe some do's and don'ts. And then we'll actually pull up a sample, spend a few minutes talking about that.
Yeah, I think from all my years at Berkeley Haas, I think this might be my most favorite essay that we ever came up with. And this was co-developed with the admissions committee, I want to say originally back in 2015, maybe 2016. And there have been other iterations of it or things that have replaced it in various years, but it's good to see that Haas is coming back to it. I think this essay is really an opportunity for you as an applicant to tell your unique story. So the first thing I want to reiterate is that there is no right answer here. There is honestly and truly no one thing that the Haas Admissions Committee is looking for here. They are looking to hear from you and learn something unique and special about you, something that makes you different from other candidates. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a professional example. I think one, and I'm not going to call this a don't per se, but I think oftentimes there is pressure that applicants feel to only showcase their professional side and their achievements in the workplace. And I think there are other places in the application where you can do that. There is another essay that's going to be specifically looking into some of that. This is a great opportunity for you to share something from your personal background, something that matters to you. I think that Another thing that I want to emphasize here is that not only is it important to share the what makes you feel alive, but the piece that's the most important here is the why. Okay, so it's really explaining the background, bringing it to life, using description, helping us, peel back the layers of who you are. I reference oftentimes Simon Sinek in his Start With Why framework, which has why in the center, how around that, and then the what on the outside. The what is what we see, it's the outcome, it's the result. The how is obviously the process, but the why is what showcases your passion, your purpose, your belief. And that's what this essay is an opportunity for you to do.
Great. And, we had a courageous, as I think has happened on a variety of these essay review calls, school-specific essay review calls with GMAT Club. Some courageous applicants out there have been willing to share their drafts in current form. So we're going to pull one up and just offer some thoughts about it. We do have to admit this, for many of the reasons Morgan described, this is one of the hardest essays, I would say, to even give advice about, because it's almost transcends. I mean, that is ultimately our job, and we're going to try to give you some pointers here, as Morgan just did. But it transcends rubric. There's no definitive structure, tell the story this way or use this as a starting point. It is a soul-searching essay, a much more open-ended essay where you really, again, I'll use that metaphor, rip the wires out of the wall of your life, take inventory of what's in there, do that for yourself introspectively, as well as, if it's with friends, colleagues, close family members, or with admissions consultants, to figure out what is that thing that really makes you you. So we have a brave applicant out there who shared this draft. We haven't touched the text, but we have looked at it and talked about it a little bit. Before I pass it back to Morgan, I just do want to make some formatting and technical observations here. We did receive it with a couple of typos. I know it's just a draft, but obviously make sure you could see Microsoft PowerPoint underlining them in red. Decipher is misspelled, explained is misspelled, maintenance is misspelled. Goes without saying, please proofread and smooth out and correct any errors like that. Another little thing here, we sometimes see this, but it was delivered to us, the draft, as one giant paragraph. So a 300-word essay without any paragraphing. Again, these aren't content-related advice. This isn't content-related advice, but admissions officers are reading through mountains of applications and text upon text upon text. The human mind in general, especially the contemporary human mind, where we live in the Twitterverse or whatever, people digest information in nuggets, in chunks. So we would strongly encourage, and if we were reviewing kind of in a more hands-on way, an essay like this should be paragraphed. There's no formula for that. It should be 2 paragraphs or 3 or 4, but definitely breaking up appropriate kind of essay design and chunking. And that's true of essays. It's probably true for your recommenders. It's true on resumes as well. We'll see first draft resumes where there's no white space at all and everything bleeds to the next. Just think if you were receiving that, your eyes risk glazing over and you're not actually going to wrestle with or digest the points that are in there. From a content perspective, Morgan, very interesting topic here. Thoughts, reactions, takeaways from looking at this?
Yeah, for sure. So I think this is a great first draft. I think this is definitely headed in the right direction. It's fun, it's memorable. It helps us get a sense of who this applicant is, when they're not sitting in a classroom, when they're not, participating in clubs, when they're not job searching. It gives us a window into their background, their family, their experience from the past, and things that matter to them. It's also very descriptive. It opens up with a very, sort of vivid description of this experience. We feel like we are right there with them. So it immediately pulls the admissions reader in. And something I want to reiterate that Greg kind of just alluded to is that, I think it's really important to remember that on the other end of this application is a real person reading your application. And so to find a way to connect with them, and I think that this this essay in particular is a great way to do that. To find a way to lure them in right up front is a great strategic approach here. What I would say though is I think there's opportunities for this to become an even stronger essay, and thank you to whoever submitted it. One, I think that actually the most interesting piece here that I want to know more about comes about 2/3 of the way through. So there's a sentence that says, growing up, road trips became a kind of love language for my family as we'd cram in our family of 5 into a small vehicle and take ourselves on an adventure. That is the most interesting piece of this. While the opening couple of sentences lure us in, what I would love to see is the front part trimmed a little bit and a little bit more elaboration on this growing up, road trips, love language for their family. Tell me more about that. I want to hear more about why this is so important to you. You've drawn me in with this description. Now let's focus on the why. Again, this is really what's going to help unleash your passion, what you believe in, why this was so important to your family. And then potentially here at the end, I love that there's a little bit of space, again, that talks about, the national parks as a way to gain new perspective, right? So it ties this experience into kind of who they are as a person, what they value. This shows for us curiosity, sense of adventure, willing to take risks. And we get that from the beginning. So, as an admissions committee member, even though this is on the surface, seemingly a essay about a car breaking down while on a road trip, there's so much more that we gain from this. And the person did a really nice job, again, of kind of connecting it to who they are, what they believe in, what matters to them. In the event that there was a sentence or a few words left at the end before you reach the word count, you could even tie this up in a nice little bow by acknowledging something about the national parks in California that you can't wait to tour when you become a student at Berkeley Haas. So again, definitely don't try and force that into your essay if it doesn't make sense. But I think it is kind of fun to acknowledge that, hey, this thing that's really so important to you that makes you feel most alive could even continue as a student in the Berkeley Haas program.
Great. Thank you, Morgan. And yeah, again, to the folks out there, this is a tougher one. And even to see sometimes you see examples or samples for certain types of essays and you're like, oh, okay, I can take that and run with it. But the topic that, not that you should be mimicking other people's samples, but the point being here, one person might be writing about family road trips and cars breaking down. What's going to be what matters most to somebody else or what makes you feel most alive is just going to vary so much. To reinforce something else Morgan said, look how seemingly commonplace or perhaps outwardly commonplace this topic is. Cars, road trips. You don't have to feel this pressure to say that it's we think feel alive. Like some people's brains go toward adventure sports or hang gliding or rock climbing. If that's you, that's fine. And we don't need to, have been a fighter pilot in the military either. It's really about reaching inside yourself and very genuinely sharing what it is. It might be these things that are just sort of day-to-day, week-to-week family thing, so take inventory of that. A few other tactical things Morgan alluded to, if we were going to just try to press into this essay a little bit more. The part that Morgan mentioned, perhaps truncating the opening anecdote a little bit. We like the opening anecdote. It draws the reader in. It is a storytelling device. It is kind of a show rather than a tell, which we like. There might be an opportunity, though, to shorten that a little bit, maybe even make it its own paragraph and then have a space and go into maybe a paragraph break there. Mm-hmm. And then to redeploy the word count that you've bought back by tightening that opening anecdote into pressing into the yellow, the line that Morgan really loved about road trips became a love language for my family. There's probably more why in there.
I want to know what that means. What do you mean love language? There's clearly more there. So that's why, to be honest, there's a number of different places in here that you could choose to dig into. That is the one that stands out for me, that makes me ask, oh, I want to know more. Greg, I just wanted to share, I think, like I mentioned at the beginning, this was one of my favorite essays, and it's as an admissions committee reader. And there is one that I recall. There's many, we read thousands of essays, but there is one from my time that I remember that took a very different approach. And I think you're right, because a lot of people may assume that what makes you feel alive, they might gravitate towards an adventure sport or activity. This one is about driving and road tripping and why that matters. The one that I recall that was so memorable came from actually one of our military applicants. And he talked about growing up in a military family and having to move around a lot, and having many times where he was separated from his father, who was serving in the military and was deployed. And so what he talked about was how hearing the Star-Spangled Banner, every time he heard the Star-Spangled Banner, that made him feel alive because it reminded him of home. It gave him a sense of home and of belonging. And so that even when he was separated physically from his family, or his father in particular, he felt connected to him, and that feeling made him feel alive and energized and whole. So I think there's a lot of different ways to interpret the word alive. And so just to be creative, have some fun with it, take some risks, and see where you go. Again, no right answer. So.
For sure. And I think be vulnerable. Don't be afraid to take those risks. Morgan mentioned you are speaking to a human on the other side of this, an admissions reader, somebody who potentially might need to go in front of others on the admissions team and perhaps advocate for you or summarize your story. So again, way easier said than done, but be introspective, be vulnerable. Don't be afraid to take risks, reach inside yourself. These all sound like cliches. They're so much easier said than done. Yeah. It takes thought, and it can take conversation. And obviously, of course, we'd be happy to engage in that thought process.
Yeah. I might even say, and I know we have to get onto the other essays, but if you're approaching the Haas application, right, there's these 4 essays plus the 2 optional. This might be the last essay that I would, so 2 things. One, if you have an obvious answer to this and you're super excited to write about it, then by all means, start with this essay as the first one that you tackle. If you're struggling a little bit, I would actually recommend doing the other 3 required essays first and using this one to fill in the gaps, right? Because there is so much flexibility here, and you can take it in any number of different directions, to write the others first and then see what's missing from my story, right? What's missing from my narrative? What piece of the puzzle do I still need to fill in? And then you can flex with this one to do that. And then the second piece, not specifically related to this essay, but I wanted to say it earlier and forgot. So this is a little glimpse behind the scenes of the admissions process. As we are reviewing your application, we are taking notes in a separate window. And typically we have our notes are chunked out into different sections. So we'll have a section of notes about your work experience. We'll have a section of notes on your essays. We might have a section of notes about your leadership or your cultural fit. And this is going to vary by program, and to be honest, may have changed a little bit at Haas as well. That said, you want to think about, as the admissions committee is stepping away from this particular essay and from your other essays, what are the most important nuggets of information that you want them to jot down in their notes? Because we're going to be reading hundreds, if not thousands, of applications and definitely essays. And we're not going to be able to capture everything about you in those notes. So we're really just going to type in the highlights. So you want to make sure that if we are kind of forming a Cliff's Notes version of your application in our notes, which will then potentially be circulated to other admissions committee members and or used later on in the process to advocate for your admission, you want to make sure that you've made it very clear and straightforward, and that there are, almost like bullet points that could be taken away from your application into those notes.
Great. Thank you for that, Morgan. And I've even kind of thought, as we think about our own video series with Avanti Prep, and look into September and October, a behind the admissions veil video would probably be, not in a way that violates, protocols and things like that, but just how, of course, take us into the mindset of an admissions committee. So we appreciate hearing that, because I think it is, rare and unique, totally, and helpful for everyone to hear.
And I would say, I would say that my approach to admissions, and I think remains the case at Haas, which is one of the things I love so much about the program, is that we very much saw our role not so much as gatekeepers in the admissions committee, but really as your advocates, as your partners, as your champions. We were looking for reasons and ways to admit you, not so much reasons to deny you. And I think that having that positive partnership mindset is something that, in my mindset, not just Haas admissions apart, but to some degree the program apart as well. But I'll try and reserve my bias for now.
Well, thank you again. Essay 2. How will an MBA help you achieve your short and long-term goals? This is 300 words. I will put a plug out there, and maybe our moderator can post a link to Avanti Prep's Deconstructing the Career Goals, Why MBA, Why Our School essay video, which is kind of a 90-minute deep dive tutorial on all versions of this essay. And I imagine the folks we have joining us today are applying to other schools in addition to Haas and are encountering different versions and different wordings of an essay like this. Some schools out there have what we would call kind of full versions. I'm referring here to essays like Wharton Essay 1, LBS Essay 1, where you're being asked, what are your goals? Why do you need an MBA to achieve those goals, or why now? Why MBA now? And how does our school uniquely help you get there? There are essays out there. That's kind of when that's all packaged together, that's a classic kind of all-encompassing goals essay. Some people will call it even a personal statement. I think that's a little bit of, people don't use that term quite as much anymore, but what are your goals? Why MBA? Why now? And why our school? Haas is asking a piece of that. So what we've put up on the page here are actually adapted from that Deconstructing that essay question video. We deconstructed it into 6 parts. It doesn't mean each of those 6 parts should get equal attention in a Wharton Essay 1 or an LBS Essay 1. But those are 6 parts to think about. What are your short-term goals? A. What are your long-term goals? B. Why are these goals your goals? What's the passion, purpose, and impact behind them? It doesn't have to come in this order either, by the way. A little bit perhaps of what knowledge, skill, and experience you already have to achieve those goals. What are you missing? What are your gaps? Why do you need an MBA? And then in some cases, again, not for Haas here, but how do the school you're applying to's resources, culture, community, leadership opportunities, offerings, etc., uniquely propel you toward those goals? So if that's the full menu that some schools ask, what is Haas asking here? Well, Haas is focusing very specifically on the why MBA portion. It's really this that we've highlighted in yellow. Now, they are saying, now in order to say why you need an MBA, and you can see it referenced in the prompt as well, how will an MBA help you achieve your short and long-term goals? You sort of need to start by letting the reader know what those short and long-term goals are. So again, this is not to scale. I don't want people to walk away thinking my goals should be 3/4 of this essay and my why MBA should be 1/4. That's really just how it's written on the page. If anything, it might actually be the reverse. Your goals might be the beginning of the essay to context set and to paint the forward picture of where you want to go. And then why MBA becomes the meat of it. I'm just actually going to flip, then I'll pass it over to Morgan. Here's a visual, probably a better visual of what we're talking about. On the right side of the page, under the post-MBA vision column, we want to hear about your forward vision, your short-term goals. Haas uses the terms short and long, so definitely both of those. Don't omit one. Sometimes people even throw in kind of a medium-term goal or a bridge between short and long. You're welcome to do that. We want to hear about those goals. We want to know the passion, purpose, and impact behind those goals. Why are these goals your goals? What bigger picture problems are you trying to solve? What impact do you hope to have? Once you paint that forward vision, that post-MBA career vision, think backward to the other side of the page. You've already got some knowledge, skill, and experience. We call them ABC on this slide. You've already got some knowledge, skill, and experience that give you a relevant foundation to achieve these goals. Don't spend too much time talking about that, though. That's going to eat up essay. They're really asking the middle part, what are you missing? But sometimes to at least think about what you're missing, you want to think about what you already have. So these are my goals. I've already got ABC. I'm missing X and Y and Z. That's my why MBA. That's really the primary focus of this essay question highlighted here. Haas in this essay question, again, is actually not asking, they're not asking this part. They're not asking why Haas. They're really asking this part. What are your gaps? Why MBA? And in order to get there, we want to do some painting of a forward picture. Last thought, then let me pass it to Morgan. It's no accident on this page that we have these chunked into 3 buckets, X, Y, Z. It could be 4 buckets. I mean, you're not wed to 3. It could be 2, it could be 3, it could be 4. But that is there to encourage you, to imbue upon you how thoughtful and specific and concrete these YMBA buckets or gaps should be. They're going to vary by person. They should be you specific, your growth needs specific, your goals specific. If you put a gap in there or a YMBA articulation in an essay, and I can take it out and drop it in somebody else's essay, then it's not specific enough. It has to be hyper specific to you. Here again, be vulnerable, be self-aware. X, Y, Z, again, we bucket them differently. Like we don't want to hit just one, like you shouldn't just talk about classroom things in here either. We want these gaps to be diverse. Your YMBA reasons to be diverse. Some might be academic or knowledge related. Others might be experience related. Others might be leadership growth related. Some might be network related or recruiting related. So there's a whole kind of diverse array there. That's my more than 2 cents on it. I will pass it to Morgan for for additional thoughts around what from an admissions perspective.
Yeah, no, and Greg, I think you did a really nice job of explaining this. And, I think that the visual that you had up is really accurate. This is the response to this essay question is formulaic. Not to say that you can't personalize it and make it interesting, but there is a formula that Haas is looking for. And largely what an admissions committee member reading this is going to be looking for is, do they know what their short-term career goal plan is? And I say plan loosely. We acknowledge as a former admissions committee member, we acknowledge that your plan is subject to change and very likely through an MBA experience will change. But at this point in time, at the application process, they want to know that you have an idea, a trajectory that you're going to go on. So they're going to be looking for, do they have a well-articulated short-term plan, and short-term meaning the job that you want to have right out of MBA school. Is that goal reasonable considering the background and experience that you have? So, certainly business school is about taking risks. It's about growing. It's about, taking on new challenges. And, I forget what the percentage is now, but something like 75% of students do pivot into new careers. So not to say that you can't or shouldn't talk about making a major shift, but this is where the how will the MBA, the admissions committee wants to see that you have done some self-reflection, self-awareness, and that you have identified those gaps, that X, Y, Z that Greg was talking about to get from wherever you are now to where you want to be, and that it seems reasonable within the 2-year full-time MBA that you can make that transition. So I think, something else I want to call out here that I think is really interesting and potentially a little different from other programs is that this question doesn't ask you why an MBA, why you need an MBA. What it actually asks you is how. And I think the difference here is how implies a process. How implies transition, progression. It wants to understand the actions, initiatives that you will undertake to make that transformation. So Haas does not explicitly ask here for why Haas. And the reason for that, I would assume based on my prior experience, is that historically, when we used to ask for why Haas, we would end up getting a laundry list of classes or clubs that had simply been cut and pasted from the website into the essay. To be honest, it's not a good use of word space for you. It doesn't help us know anything about you other than you've read our website. And there are just so many better ways to use that space, which is why we took it out. It is no longer in this question. However, if within this word count and within your story of how you can talk about something Haas specific. Maybe you hone in on, one particular experiential learning opportunity, one particular faculty member, something in particular that is relevant to your story. Feel free to share that. But I would caution people away from feeling like you have to add in, the 10 different people you talk to about how and why Haas will help you achieve this. Focus on quality rather than quantity.
Yes, and I think to reinforce somewhat with what Morgan mentioned, definitely be so they're not asking why Haas in this essay, as Morgan alluded. They're perhaps for the right candidate out there, if it can be done well and thoughtfully, perhaps there's a closing device that projects forward to Haas or that incorporates one really interesting example. Nevertheless, though, for interviews for any school, even if the essay question doesn't ask why Haas, you have to be ready for that in an interview. I think in recent years, Haas has kind of clubbed together that question into a what are your goals, why MBA, why Haas, all in one response, which could be a little bit daunting. We're happy to help you to prepare for that. Other schools will, in an interview, separate those into discrete and you can actually usually figure that. Go to gmatclub.com, look at the interview feedback reports, and you will see which schools have a tendency to, in an interview, club these together, club certain of these questions together versus to separate them out. And I'm talking about what are your goals, why MBA, why now, and why Haas. Why Haas, not in this essay, but something to definitely think about and enrich for later on if you're invited to interview. Two last thoughts here, and then we'll go to the video essay. Morgan, you mentioned in the short-term goals, making sure that the admissions committee hears what job or jobs is the applicant pursuing? Are they going to recruit for? I have up on the page here, go deeper than just industry, because a lot of times we will see drafts of people who got dinged and they'll come to us afterward and they'll say, well, I told them I wanted to go into finance, well, very vague, or that I wanted to go into consulting, just naming an industry. Or I wanted to go into tech, just naming an industry. How role specific or even company specific might people want to be in articulating goals?
Yeah, I think to the extent that you can name a particular job title or function, a function and industry that you're interested in, that would probably be ideal. I don't think you need to be quite as specific as listing out the exact title and company. To be honest, sometimes that could be seen as potentially risky if a candidate is so honed in on only one job at one company. So I think you want to show that you have direction, but also that you are open or acknowledge that there might be different possible outcomes. So I think, again, maybe function and industry. If you have a dream job, if you know you want to work at a certain company in a certain role, by all means, please say that. Especially if somehow within the how will an MBA help you, you can talk about why in particular that one is of interest to you. But don't feel like you have to be quite that specific. Yeah. The one thing I would add about this is that, I think if you are interested in jobs that are what might be considered non-traditional from a typical MBA path, so, right, some traditional roles, for example, might be finance and tech and consulting. Although, of course, these days, I think graduates are going in so many different directions. But I think if you're looking into what might be considered a non-traditional path, such as, for example, being an entrepreneur and starting your own company, that is an area where I think you really want to show awareness, self-awareness, research, reflection on the how, just given, that there is so much variability and risk in starting your own company. That may be a short-term goal, but I think you also want to acknowledge that, hey, I may actually need to take on a couple of more traditional type jobs to fill in some skill gaps or experience gaps while I am building out my startup. And so really, the startup is my long-term vision. There is no time horizon necessarily on the long-term vision. So, you might be thinking of that as 5 years out of business school, 10 years out, or 30 years out. But again, I think about it broadly speaking, short-term, long-term, and elaborate more if your intended career goal might be considered non-traditional by the admissions committee.
Yes. Okay, thank you. And it was my own question that did this, so I just want to re-clarify for the folks out there. We just spent a few minutes talking about goals and specificity of goals. Just to take it back to the top here with this essay question, it is really more about how will an MBA, why MBA. We don't know your goals. We need to know your goals in the beginning to understand that. But I guess what I'm saying is I don't want my question that I just asked Morgan for edification purposes to make it sound like goals should be 75% of this essay. I think we want to know your goals so that we know what you need, the process you need to undertake in order to get there. The preponderance, the main focus of this essay is ultimately on that why MBA or how will an MBA. And again, make that super specific, super specific to you, super specific to your goals. And, don't just throw like, I need to learn accounting. That would be very too basic and very unidimensional. We want multidimensional, thoughtful, concrete, specific, introspective, connected to you, connected to your goals. On to the video question, a new one for Haas this year, but about what's becoming, I was going to say, a very old topic for Haas, which is the 4 defining principles, the 4 defining leadership principles. The Berkeley MBA program develops leaders who embody our 4 defining leadership principles. There's a sublink in the app to those. And if you're applying to Haas and you're not aware of them, definitely become aware. Briefly introduce yourself to the admissions committee, explain which leadership principle resonates most with you, and tell us how you've exemplified the principle in your personal or professional life. So, Morgan, what is Haas looking for with a question like this? And are there any do's or don'ts that you might think about as you wrestle with it?
Yeah, no, I mean, so this is a new one, as Greg mentioned, and so not one that I have personal experience with. The defining leadership principles and culture fit more broadly have always been very important, not just to the Haas admissions committee, but to everyone in the Haas community. And so again, if they are not already on your radar or something that you are intimately familiar with, definitely start with the website, but to the extent that you can really get to know, as Greg has outlined here, those principles by talking with current students, by talking with alumni, by watching videos, I would encourage you to really try and dive into them a little bit. So that way, when you are answering this video question in just 2 minutes, which by the way is really short, you can answer it authentically. And I think, I'm trying to put myself on the other side of this, reviewing these videos. What am I looking for? I'm looking for authenticity. And I think authenticity can really only come through if you've done your research. You may end up reading from a script that you have up on the side of the screen, and that's perfectly fine too. But I think to the extent that you can share how you have exemplified that leadership principle in a authentic, genuine, and if possible, descriptive way would be really helpful. I think it gives you the option of pulling either from your personal or professional life. So again, this is a nice opportunity to think about all of the essays holistically and to see, have I already shared something from my personal background? If you have not yet, if, for example, you decide to take your Alive essay and use a professional experience, then you definitely want to use this for personal. I think one of these 4 essays must share something personal about you. Again, because we're trying to get to know not just who you're going to be in the classroom or in the work setting, but how you show up in life. Let's see what else. The other thing, this is 2 minutes. Pick one. Do not pick all 4. Right? Follow the directions. I know that may be hard, but choose one. There is no right answer. Okay. We used to sometimes open up meetings, with new members of the community by having them introduce themselves and say what their favorite defining leadership principle is. Again, there's no right answer, right? So there's no one that the admissions committee is looking for. They're all perfectly acceptable. You can even pick one, and this is my personal approach here. You can even pick one if it's not your favorite, but you have the best story behind it. Okay. So I think you also want to think about how this is going to present, how this is going to round out your entire narrative, and which one you feel the most comfortable speaking to, which may mean the one that you have the best example for, even if it's not officially your favorite.
For sure. And yeah, this is actually a question we would occasionally see in Haas interviews sometimes, because the defining principles, a lot of schools have marketing slogans and values, and we would definitely encourage you, for any school you're applying to engage with that through research, through conversations with students and alumni, through info sessions and the like. Haas takes these very seriously. Morgan just offered some examples as to why, people even being invited to, share their own at internal meetings.
At town hall meetings. Yep, exactly.
I remember even classes where toward the end of the class, something would get tied back to a certain defining principle. The defining principles are like literally emblazoned in the courtyard, on the in the courtyard brick. So they are taken very seriously. This is definitely a question to be taken seriously. Just to hammer home and reiterate some of the things Morgan mentioned, and try to maybe even project it forward a little for you out there, applicants out there who maybe don't know where to start. Just a few thoughts on that, and then we'll go into the fourth essay. Read the essay question. Morgan mentioned a moment ago, focus on one leadership principle. Well, that, if read this closely, you will see it says, which leadership principle resonates most with you? That implies picking one and focusing on one principle here, one defining principle here. Now, at the back end, tell us how you've exemplified that principle. It does not necessarily say that you need to focus on one example. So definitely one principle, but within your 2 minutes, you could kind of figure out, do I have one really major example that I want to share that shows how I exemplify this principle? Or might I have 2 mini examples, 2 medium-sized examples that perhaps even show a pattern of my exemplifying this principle? Some people might even have like 3 small to medium examples that show a real pattern from different points in their life. You just got to make sure that fits and that you're not sacrificing specificity and depth in order to fit too many in there. Morgan mentioned fitting this into the more like the macro view of your essay questions. That goes back to some of that story planning and story mapping that we talked about earlier. Which parts of you slot in to different levers or different essays within the application? Make sure you cover each component of this question prompt in your answer. There are really 3 components here. If you deconstruct, there's a briefly introduce yourself. There is explain which leadership principle resonates most with you. And then there's tell us how you've exemplified that principle in your personal and professional life. So there are 3 parts, but those first 2 parts really feel pretty brief to us. Briefly introduce yourself. That's probably just context setting, who you are, where you're from, what you do. This is not a MIT Sloan video, for those applying there are familiar with it, where it's 1 minute just introducing yourself. This is a brief introduction in the beginning in order to then get into which defining principle, make it clear, say which one it is, and then really to get into the how you've exemplified it. If you're looking for some structure or some ideas, at least to get thoughts down on how do you dip into that example or examples, the old kind of classic approach in, a lot of different types of storytelling, verbal communication, interviews, is the STAR method: situation, task, action, result. We have our own little spin on it. For those of you who have watched other of our videos before, I talk about the SCARL method: situation, challenge, action, 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 result, lesson. Doesn't mean you need to have 3 actions in there, but we do like to kind of highlight that for folks to say, hey, look, whether this is in a video like this or a interview response, we don't want to make it sound like you just snapped your fingers and everything was great. You overcame some challenge or you exemplify. Oftentimes there's some layering. First I did this, then we did this, then I did this. It doesn't have to be 3 actions. It's just, again, to remind people to consider the how. And the other little difference here from the STAR method is this lesson piece at the end. Is there a thoughtful insight that you could share toward the back end of that? Is there something that triggered a growth moment for you, or a way that you might have taken what you learned from a previous experience and applied it forward, or maybe even, could apply it at Haas? So, that's their video this year. I think we'll be, we're eager to continue to see how people are tackling this and to offer our further thoughts on a, person-to-person, applicant-to-applicant basis. Finally, the fourth required essay question, another written one that Haas has had for a few years now. It was 150 words last year. It's now 300 words. It's the DEI, or now DEIJB, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Justice, and Belonging essay question. It is required. Can you please describe an experience or exposure you have in the area of diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and belonging, whether through community organizations, personal, or the workplace? Morgan, last but not least here, the fourth required essay question. Thoughts behind it?
Yeah, again, and I think, Greg, you had mentioned that the change from last year to this year is that they increased the word count from 150 to 300, right? And did they add the justice and belonging piece?
Yes, at a very micro level, these two words
Yes.
were introduced. So those are the changes: the word count and the inclusion of the words justice and belonging.
Yeah. Okay. So I think, we only have a few minutes left here, but what I want to say about this essay is that, there is a lot of flexibility here, right? So the fact that they have added word count and that they have added justice and belonging to the description really should allow candidates to interpret this and write about their experiences in many different ways. Ultimately, right, the DEI-JB question is really trying to get at your broader awareness, your cultural awareness, your global awareness, getting at understanding, how you show up in this world, how you fit in this world, how you interact with people around you who are like you and who are dissimilar to you. Berkeley Haas strives to be a very diverse community, bringing in people from all different backgrounds, experiences, perspectives. And so they just want to ensure through this question that you are similarly coming in with an appreciation and awareness for that diversity. But again, this is one of those where I don't think there's any right or wrong way to answer this. And there is a lot of flexibility here. So whereas in other examples, in other essays, we were clearly leaning towards one example or, choose one of these, you could write about DEIJ or B. You can use, it says, in any experience or exposure, right? So that could be 1, 2, even 3. The fact that they've extended the word count indicates to me that they weren't getting quite enough substance last year from this essay, that there wasn't enough space for applicants to fully tell their story. So they've doubled it, so now you can fully tell your story. So I would encourage you to really lean into that, try and be thoughtful, introspective. My personal take is I always find it easier to narrow the number of examples, because then you can really dive into that and unfold. And to be honest with you, leaning into one example and I think reveals more about your candidacy, your background, your character, who you are, than just listing out multiple things. And again, this has come from the Adcom perspective. On the other side of this, they're taking notes. Are they more likely to take notes on this if there's one specific experience that they can really latch onto, or are they, because they're not going to be able to remember the five different examples that you put in. So I personally think it's better to use your 300 word count on one example, but that's just how I would approach it. And I'm sure others may approach it differently.
I think we always, I think we could say always actually, within MBA application land, like depth and like specificity. Take us inside the moment. That is, again, why we use this, patent pending SCARL reminder. It doesn't have, you're not wed to that exact structure, but when you do focus deeper in less depth in a single example, will allow you to go deeper into that how, into the actions, into the discrete steps, into the lessons and insights and revelations and growth that might have come. At the same time, it might vary a little bit by applicant. When we take inventory of those stories, that, again, that step that sits above and before going into essays, somebody might shortlist. You could all, it would even be a way to, like, before you dig into this essay, shortlist what experiences you think you have in this DEIJB orbit. And then we would, if we were working with you, discuss and want to learn about and try to figure out, does one of those really rise? And that should be the centerpiece example to an essay like this. There will be other applicants out there where they might have two, maybe those two are even interconnected, and one builds on the other. And then those people might be more apt for for 2. Yeah, there is a point where, we definitely don't like 5. Then you're listing. We want to storytell with these and dive into the depth. Again, you'll see that Scarl method on here. It's not to over rubric or make these overly formulaic. It's intended to give you a starting point that reminds you not to just describe any kind of example in an essay, in this essay, in the previous video essay, in any interview response, in any other essay. If you're talking about an example, don't just describe it from 30,000 feet. Take us inside. Tell us the how. Take us inside your brain, inside the steps, inside your actions. Tell us what you learned or where you failed or how you had to adapt or adjust. So that is the 4th essay question here for Haas. We have a couple of questions. Maybe we can spend the last, 8 to 10 minutes now in the question box. I could read those out. Before we do that, quick reminder before we get into the questions. I mentioned a couple of, I mentioned one of these relevant video tutorials. You could go to our website, avantiprep.com. You could sign up for a free consultation if you'd like to connect with us and learn about how we could work together. You can go to our blog and video page, and you will find pretty deep video tutorials about a variety of topics. Certainly the essay, we've got one on recommenders and resume, the classic kind of career goals, why MBA, why our school video is up there. And then another one as well, we've talked a few times or mentioned peppered throughout this, connecting with students and alumni, engaging with schools, learning about them. You're not doing that to like laundry list who spoke to the most people in your application. You're doing that to learn about the fabric of the school and its resources beyond the obvious, beyond the front page of the school website, and to bring stories to life. We have a video about how to go about that, and very importantly, not just to go about that, but how to take the insights that you glean from those conversations and turn them into real, meaningful, you-specific, school-specific reasons why you fit with that school or how you might uniquely contribute to that school. So just to mention a couple of those, again, avantiprep.com, you can explore our services. You can read our verified client testimonials. We do think we have some of the most detailed and transparent testimonials out there. People will really take you inside what it was like to work together. Sign up for a free consultation. Apropos to this call, because we have Morgan here, we're offering a Morgan special, and there's run up to the Haas deadlines and the deadlines for round 1, a 10% discount on any services with Morgan Bernstein. You now know who she is. You could sign up by September 1st to achieve that discount. Use them anytime thereafter. You don't have to use the services in the next 8 days. You just have to sign up in the next 8 days. Likewise with interview prep, that's a little further out on the horizon, although some of you might have Darden early action interview prep, Fuqua open interview prep, perhaps Tuck for those of you who apply by September 1st. You get an automatic interview, and those interviews can occur sometimes a little bit sooner, or you sign up a little bit sooner. So there will be interviews. October is usually the big interview month for round 1, but some of them bleed into September. And if you have any on your plate, you can do interview prep with Morgan or any other member of our team. Quick questions over in the side here. We'll just do maybe 2 or 3.
Greg, I just wanted to jump in real quick because unfortunately, I'm actually going to have to run to another meeting here in a few minutes. But I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for joining. And I know you were going to jump into the comments here. I was looking through them, and there was one that I did want to comment on. It was a quick question about the optional essays. And I know we did not have a chance to talk about that today. One thing I want to just acknowledge, optional means optional. If you don't have something that you feel directly fits into one of these 2 questions here, do not answer these questions. From the admissions committee member's perspective, this is, while we love learning about you and reading your application, we ask you those 4 essay questions in anticipation that will fully give us, I keep saying us, but that will give the admissions committee a full perspective of who you are and an ability to evaluate you based on just those essays. This is an additional essay that we need to read through. So we would appreciate your using good judgment and only sharing here something that you feel is deeply important and is missing to help us understand your full narrative, your full story. Otherwise, leave it blank. There is no expectation that there will be any response here. You are not going to get dinged for leaving this blank. If you do choose to respond to this, particularly, I think the second one, it would be helpful to just use bullet points, make it short, sweet, easy to digest. And I'm going to keep it at that. Remember, optional is optional.
Yes. And I'll stick around. Thank you so much, Morgan. I'll stick around for another 5 minutes here to just round out some of these optional, some of these questions from the crowd.
Thanks so much. Well, I look forward to hopefully working with some of these applicants in the future. Thanks, Greg.
Yes.
Have a good one.
Thank you again. Have a great day. So we had the question about the optional there. Morgan just described. The specific question was, for the Haas optional essays, is it more important to pick one unique concept and flow it as an essay than to do a bullet point type situation, 2 or 3 points? As Morgan just mentioned, this really pertains, I think, to this one. It's not an extra open-ended essay. It is there, and this is true of pretty much every U.S. program I can think of. They have options. Some of them call them optional essays. Some of them call them additional information. They'll be 500 characters. There'll be 250 words. There'll be 150 words. There'll be 500 words. Haas, I don't even think, puts a word limit on it. But that doesn't mean you should write a whole nother essay. Haas already has 4 essays. That's a lot. This is purely for this kind of optional essay is purely for clarifying things that need clarifying. Employment gaps, which, by the way, some schools will actually ask about in a separate text box in their application. But you had an employment gap of some, usually greater than 3 months. If you had poor or weird academic performance, maybe some failures or withdrawals or low grades. If there's supplemental coursework that the school has not given you a chance to showcase elsewhere, weird choice of recommenders. Again, that's something that schools would, some schools will ask about under a separate question. Other schools might want you to address in the optional, but it does not have to be a cohesive essay, even for schools that don't say, like Haas actually says, bullet it out. Great. Even for schools that don't say bullet it out, these usually manifest as quasi bullets, like 2 or 3 sentence explanatory strips. And again, you kind of have to think about, what would somebody who's going through my application be wondering about, or seem weird or seem off or require a little bit of extra explanation. I think we had 1 or 2. We had a question about the advanced access essay questions for Haas. Undergraduates can gain conditional admission and then start your study at Berkeley Haas for their MBA after a 2 to 5 year deferment. That deadline is not until April 25th of 2024. The language that's still on the screen for that program says it's similar to the full-time program application. A resume, 2 LORs, 2 short essays, undergraduate transcripts. I suspect that language is a carryover from last year when, like, almost all of Haas's programs, including the full-time, had 2 essays. I would either, if you want to make sure, with an April deadline, it's very possible for the individual who asked about this, it's very possible that the accelerated program, the advanced access, has not yet updated that. Accelerated access has not yet updated that. Again, with the deadline being, still 8 months away. So I think keep your eyes out for any potential updates on the essay requirements for accelerated access. And if it feels like it's getting a little later into the fall, you could always reach out to the admissions committee there. Final question: in the career goals essay, is it okay to write about personal achievements that would occur or that would be because of accomplishing your career goals? Okay, so let me just grab that phrase, personal achievements. Certainly in the career goals essay, they should be light on past personal achievements. In fact, in this Haas essay of only 300, you'll occasionally get a school like London Business School or Cornell Johnson in their goals essay that's going to say something like, how has your previous experience prepared or encouraged you to achieve these goals? So sometimes there you might see, there might be a little bit more about personal achievements that have already occurred. But even then, I think you still have to make sure you're sharing your goals and why MBA now and why LBS. Johnson does not ask why Johnson in that essay. personal achievements that would occur because of you accomplishing the goals that you've outlined. I don't know if I would, personal achievements maybe is the phrase I'm wrestling with here. I think certainly like the impact you hope to create, the business problem or problems you hope to attack, the stamp you hope to leave on an industry, why you're attracted to that industry, why you're attracted to these goals. I think some of that in there, yes. But even then, if we go back to the essay question for Haas, we want it, how will an MBA help you achieve your short and long-term career goals? How will an MBA, why MBA is really the main focus of that. We need to know your goals in the beginning, and maybe we want to know a little bit, maybe it's a sentence and a half about the stamp you want to leave and the why behind your goals. But I would caution against going too deep into that, because the more you do about goals, the less space you're going to have for why MBA in this version of the Haas essay. And you do have to judge that caliber. You do have to judge the inclusion worthiness of that in general, as well as how much to put into that from school to school and essay to essay to essay. All right, I will take one more question here. Is it too boring to have a goal like I want to become a strategy consultant after graduation and become a partner in my consulting firm long term? Certainly the short-term version of that is not too boring. You have schools that graduate 25 to 35% of their class into strategy consulting. What I would encourage with the short-term part of that goal is a lot of MBA graduates who go into consulting spend 2 years as a generalist at that firm. And then they're going to transition to some either industry focus or industry specialty or functional specialty within strategy consulting. I would take the reader there. Yes, you generalist, that's helpful. You're going to get a variety of different projects, industry projects, cases, clients, functional focuses. But what specific what then? You spend 2 years as a generalist at McKinsey or Bain or BCG or Deloitte or any of the others. What do you want to do after those 2 years? Is there a specific industry that you're drawn to, and why that industry? Is there a specific functional area of functional expertise that you want to develop and really focus on that within your consulting firm, become the specialist in that? That might lead to some medium-term goal. I think so that's the short-term part. The long-term part, I just want to become a partner at my consulting firm. I would introspect about that. Let's talk about your passions, your motivations, your career interests. I have seen effective cases where somebody might articulate consulting as a short-term goal in the manner ideally I just described, with the extra nuance of what industry or functional focus you want to have after those first 2 years. Maybe becoming a partner is an extension of that, is like kind of a medium-term goal. I would almost want to talk about and revisit whether there's some other long-term goal out there that's deep inside. If we could really, Columbia in essay 1, they could say, what would be your dream job? Think of it in those terms. What would be your dream job? If like nobody was looking, I don't know, and you could tell your best friend, or in those quiet moments when you're thinking what your dream job would be, think about that. Maybe becoming a partner can be the middle step toward that, I don't know, potentially more interesting or authentic long-term goal. So take some thought, take some conversation, but that's how I would press down on, meaning encourage you to develop the specificity of goals that orbit around consulting. So thank you all for your time today. We appreciate the opportunity to walk you through these Haas essays, and hopefully some of the tidbits we offered along the way are going to be relatable to a lot of other essays and a lot of other schools. Please like and subscribe. Follow GMAT Club. Reach out to us at Avanti Prep. We have those. We are always available for free consultations if you're interested in how we work with clients, or just some thoughts on your profile, your story. And like we said, we have some discounts running. We do actually have a special page on our website called Current Deals, and we kind of rotate those depending on what season we're in from an application standpoint. So we're running a few specials. Morgan is, even in this lead up to spots can fill up with Morgan, but I think that is such a unique person and resource to have available as you take steps forward, whether with Haas specifically, or certainly with other, other top program. So hope to connect with you again in the future. Thank you again for your time, and we wish you all the best of luck with your MBA applications. Have a great day.